What happens when Henry Cavill walks onto a live daytime talk show expecting a routine interview, only to find himself in the middle of one of the most uncomfortable exchanges of the year with Joy Behar. What begins as a casual conversation about fame, masculinity, and Hollywood pressure slowly turns into a tense back and forth that nobody in the studio expected to see unfold live on television. Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The cameras open with applause rolling across the studio as Henry Cavill walks onto the stage smiling, waving toward the crowd while the hosts welcome him to the table. The audience is clearly excited. A few people even stand up clapping while Henry shakes hands with the panel before taking his seat. Joy smiles at him first. I have to say this immediately. Our audience has been losing their minds all morning because you're here. Henry laughs softly. That's very kind. Another host jumps in. No, seriously, backstage people were acting like royalty walked in. The audience laughs. Henry leans back comfortably. That's dangerous encouragement. Joy grins. You already know the internet treats you like the last gentleman in Hollywood. Henry smirks. That's a lot of pressure for one person. The conversation starts light. They talk about his recent projects, training routines, fan expectations, and how strange online fame can become. Henry stays relaxed, answering carefully but naturally. He jokes with the audience and keeps things easygoing. One of the hosts asks, "Do you ever get tired of constantly being called the perfect man online?" Henry immediately shakes his head. I don't think anyone should ever believe descriptions like that about themselves. It becomes unhealthy very quickly. Joy raises an eyebrow. That sounds very media-trained. The audience gives a light reaction. Henry smiles politely. Maybe experience-trained. A few laughs. Joy folds her hands. But come on, you have this image. Women adore you. Men want to look like you. You're the internet's definition of masculinity right now. Henry pauses before answering. I think social media creates exaggerated versions of people. Nobody actually knows celebrities the way they think they do. The crowd claps lightly. Joy nods slowly, but keeps looking at him closely. See, that's interesting because there's a debate happening right now about masculinity. Some people think Hollywood keeps trying to soften men. Others think traditional masculinity is the problem. Henry stays calm. I think balance is important. Joy leans forward immediately. That sounds like a politician's answer. Audience laughter. Henry smiles. Probably because extreme opinions usually create more problems. One of the co-hosts jumps in quickly. He's trying to survive this table. More laughter. Joy laughs too but continues. No, but seriously, do you think men are treated unfairly nowadays when they act masculine? Henry takes a second before speaking. I think everybody can be treated unfairly depending on the situation. Joy interrupts. That's avoiding the question. The audience reacts with a mix of laughs and tension. Henry keeps smiling but shifts slightly in his chair. No, I'm trying to answer it carefully because conversations online tend to remove nuance. One host nods. That's true. Joy crosses her arms. But careful answers are exactly why people stop trusting celebrities. A louder reaction from the audience this time. Henry blinks once, still composed. I don't think honesty requires aggression. The audience claps harder. Joy tilts her head. But honesty also means saying what you actually believe. Henry nods slowly. Agreed. Joy immediately presses again. Okay then, do you believe modern culture unfairly criticizes masculine men? The studio gets quieter. Henry looks toward the audience briefly before answering. I think modern culture sometimes struggles with allowing people to exist comfortably without forcing them into categories. The audience applauds again. Joy gives a small smile but clearly wants more. That still sounds rehearsed. Another host jumps in jokingly. Joy wants headlines today. Audience laughter. Joy shrugs. No, I want honesty. Henry finally leans forward slightly. Honesty usually comes with context, though. That's the issue. Joy stares at him for a moment. Okay, explain. Henry nods calmly. There's this tendency now where every conversation becomes extremes. If a man enjoys traditionally masculine things, some people assume he's toxic. If someone talks about emotional openness, others call him weak. Most normal people exist somewhere in the middle. A wave of applause spreads across the audience. One host points toward the crowd. That got a reaction. Joy looks around, slightly surprised by how strongly the audience responded. But here's my issue, Joy says. A lot of women hear conversations about masculinity and immediately think about control, power imbalance, bad behavior. Henry gently interrupts for the first time. Because bad behavior exists. Joy pauses. Henry continues calmly. But bad behavior doesn't belong to masculinity itself. It belongs to individuals. The audience claps loudly again. Joy leans back with a tighter smile now. See, now we're getting somewhere. Henry chuckles lightly. Were we lost before? Big laughter breaks the tension for a moment. One of the hosts laughs hardest. That was smooth. Joy points at him jokingly. Don't get too comfortable. Henry grins. I'm trying not to. The conversation moves briefly toward dating culture and online expectations. One host asks if he thinks social media has made relationships harder. Oh, absolutely, Henry says immediately. People are terrified of saying the wrong thing now. Joy jumps in fast. Or maybe people are finally being held accountable. Henry nods. That's also true. Joy watches him carefully. But you hesitated. Henry looks confused. I don't think I did. You did, Joy insists. You said people are afraid to say the wrong thing before agreeing accountability matters. Henry stays calm again. Because both things can exist simultaneously. A few audience members clap. Joy shakes her head slightly. You know what I think? I think attractive, successful men are uncomfortable because they're no longer allowed to dominate conversations the way they used to. The audience reacts loudly, some clapping, some groaning. The energy changes immediately. Henry's expression remains polite, but he becomes noticeably more serious. One co-host quickly says, All right, now we're entering dangerous territory. Joy continues anyway. No, seriously. Hollywood men spent decades controlling narratives. Now women speak up, and suddenly everyone says masculinity is under attack. Henry takes a breath before answering. I don't think respectful conversation should ever feel like an attack. Joy cuts in again. But men complain constantly now. Henry finally stops smiling for a moment. Well, he says calmly, people tend to complain when they feel they're being generalized. Unfairly. The audience reacts with louder applause. Joy folds her arms again. So now men are victims? Henry immediately shakes his head. That's not what I said. But that's where these conversations always go. Henry's voice stays controlled. No, actually, that's where conversations go when nuance disappears. The crowd reacts loudly again. One host quietly says, Okay. Joy looks directly at Henry now. You keep using the word nuance because you don't want backlash. Henry answers instantly this time. No. I use the word nuance because real people are more complicated than internet arguments. The audience erupts into applause. Even one of the co-hosts starts clapping lightly at the table. Joy notices the reaction and laughs awkwardly. Well, clearly you came prepared today. Henry smiles again, but less warmly now. I didn't come prepared for conflict. That line gets another strong audience response. Joy looks slightly defensive now. Nobody's attacking you. Henry nods politely. I didn't say you were. But you're responding like you're under interrogation. Henry chuckles quietly. I think the audience can probably feel the temperature changing a little. Huge laughter and applause break out across the studio. One host literally leans back laughing. He's not wrong. Joy tries laughing too, but the tension is visible now. She straightens her cards on the table. All right, then let me ask directly. Do you think women have made dating harder for men today? A loud collective reaction comes from the audience. Henry looks genuinely surprised by the question. Wow, he says softly. Joy shrugs. It's a fair question. Henry pauses carefully before answering. I think modern dating has become harder for everyone because people increasingly approach each other defensively. The audience quiets to listen closely. Henry continues. Men are nervous about being misunderstood. Women are nervous about being mistreated. Everybody walks into conversations expecting problems before anything even happens. Several audience members clap. One co-host nods slowly. That's actually a fair point. Joy looks unconvinced. But don't you think men created that environment? Henry finally leans in slightly, his tone still calm but noticeably firmer now. I think blaming one entire group of people for complex social problems is usually a mistake. The audience explodes into applause as the camera cuts across cheering faces in the crowd. Joy opens her mouth to respond immediately, but another host quickly jumps in. Okay, we have to take a break, because this table is getting very heated. The audience laughs loudly while Henry smiles politely and takes a sip of water. Joy adjusts her papers again, still looking frustrated as the music starts playing. And just before the cameras cut away, One audience member can clearly be heard yelling, "Let the man talk." The crowd erupts again as the show heads into commercial break. The cameras come back from commercial with the audience still buzzing louder than usual. You can feel the tension hanging over the studio immediately. Some people are still whispering about the exchange before the break while the hosts shuffle their cards and try to reset the mood. One of the co-hosts smiles toward the camera. We are back with Henry Cavill, and apparently the internet is already preparing clips from the last segment. The audience laughs loudly. Henry smiles politely again, though he looks more careful now than he did at the start of the interview. Joy Behar laughs while shaking her head. People love drama. Another host jumps in jokingly. And you definitely gave them some. The audience reacts again. Joy points toward Henry. No, he gave them some. He came in here sounding like a philosopher. Henry laughs softly. I think I just answered the questions. Joy smirks. Very strategically. Henry looks over calmly. You keep saying strategically like it's a bad thing to think before speaking. The audience immediately reacts with loud applause and a few surprised laughs. Joy pauses for a second before smiling tightly. Okay, fair enough. One of the hosts quickly changes direction. You know what I actually wanted to ask before we got sidetracked? Fame. Because I think people forget how intense fame became after Superman. Henry nods. That definitely changed things. Did it affect your personal life badly? She asks. Henry exhales through a smile. I think fame always complicates normal life. Even simple interactions become strange because people think they know you already. Joy immediately cuts in again. But you benefit from that too. Henry nods. Of course. Joy leans closer. So isn't it frustrating when celebrities complain about fame while enjoying the money and attention? A few audience members clap. Henry stays composed. I don't think acknowledging difficulty means someone is ungrateful. Joy answers quickly. But celebrities constantly want sympathy. Henry tilts his head slightly. I think celebrities are still human beings. Another host quietly mutters, that's true. Joy shrugs. Human beings with mansions. Audience laughter. Henry laughs too. That part is admittedly easier. The crowd laughs harder, and the tension briefly softens again. One host says, see, this is where people like him. He disarms situations. Joy looks directly at Henry. Or avoids them. The audience gives another loud reaction. Henry smiles politely, but doesn't answer immediately this time. Joy notices the pause. See, you're calculating every word. Henry finally responds calmly. I think there's a difference between calculating and trying to communicate responsibly. A wave of applause spreads across the audience. Joy folds her arms again. But people are tired of polished celebrity answers. Henry nods once. And people are also tired of outrage culture turning every sentence into a war. The audience reacts loudly again. One co-host raises both hands jokingly. Okay, round 2 has officially started. Laughter breaks out. Joy laughs too but keeps pressing. You say outrage culture. Some people would hear that and think you're criticizing social accountability. Henry immediately shakes his head. No, I'm criticizing performative outrage. The crowd quiets slightly. Henry continues. There's a difference between genuine concern and people looking for someone to attack online because it gives them attention. Several audience members clap. Joy jumps in fast. But powerful men have avoided accountability for decades. Henry nods calmly again. Yes, some absolutely have. Joy points toward him. Then why are you so worried about people being criticized? Henry's expression grows more serious. Because criticism and dehumanization are not the same thing. The audience reacts loudly again. One host softly says, that's an important distinction. Joy leans back. But famous men still hold most of the power in entertainment. Henry answers carefully. Some do. But I think reducing every interaction between men and women into power dynamics creates distrust everywhere. The audience gives mixed reactions this time. Joy immediately jumps on that. See, now that sounds like something internet commentators say. Henry smiles faintly. Maybe internet commentators sometimes reflect what ordinary people are feeling. That gets a surprisingly loud applause response. Joy shakes her head. Or maybe they monetize division. Henry nods. That also happens. Another host laughs. He refuses to give anybody a clean villain today. Henry grins slightly. Real life usually doesn't. The audience claps again. Joy looks at him carefully for a long moment before speaking again. You know what I think is happening here? She says. Henry gestures politely. Go ahead. I think you understand exactly what audiences want from you. Calm voice, reasonable tone, balanced answers. But underneath that, I think you're frustrated with how much culture has changed. The audience reacts loudly. Henry looks genuinely surprised now. That's a very specific conclusion. Joy shrugs. Am I wrong? Henry pauses for several seconds while the studio gets very quiet. Finally, he answers. I think culture changing is normal. Every generation changes things. Joy immediately says, That's not what I asked. Henry looks toward her calmly. No, but I'm trying to answer honestly. Joy leans in further. Are you frustrated with modern conversations around men? Another long pause. Henry finally says, I think modern conversations often encourage people to speak at each other instead of to each other. A loud applause breaks out. Joy interrupts before it even finishes. Again with the diplomat answers. Henry smiles. Would you prefer reckless ones? The audience explodes with laughter and applause. One co-host literally covers her mouth laughing while another says, Okay, that was good. Even Joy laughs despite herself. You came ready for me today. Henry shakes his head immediately. I really didn't. Joy smirks. You're too smooth. Henry shrugs lightly. Years of press tours. One host changes direction slightly. Can I ask something honestly? Do you ever feel pressure to hide parts of your personality publicly because of how quickly people judge things online? Henry answers immediately this time. Absolutely. The audience quiets again. Henry continues. I think a lot of people, not just celebrities, feel nervous speaking openly now because there's this fear that one imperfect sentence becomes your identity forever. Several audience members clap strongly. Joy jumps in again. Or maybe people just don't want to deal with consequences anymore. Henry keeps his tone steady. Consequences matter. But context matters too. Joy shakes her head slightly. You really love that word. Henry smiles. Because it matters. The audience applauds again. One host looks toward Joy jokingly. You're not winning against the British calmness. Big laughter breaks out. Joy points toward the crowd. Oh please, they'd cheer if he read the weather report. The audience erupts laughing and clapping again. Henry laughs harder this time too. That may be the nicest insult I've ever received. The mood lightens for a moment until Joy suddenly changes tone again. But let me ask you this, she says. You've played these hyper-masculine characters for years. Superman, Geralt, action heroes. Do you think Hollywood still glorifies old-fashioned male fantasies? The audience quiets immediately. Henry thinks for a second. I think stories often reflect qualities people admire. Joy interrupts. Strength, violence, dominance. Henry calmly responds, protection, responsibility, sacrifice. The audience instantly reacts with loud applause. Joy pauses after that answer. One co-host quietly says, That was a good answer. Joy notices the audience reaction again and smiles tightly. But don't you think some men hide behind those words while behaving terribly? Henry nods immediately. Of course. Joy leans forward. Then why are you so defensive whenever criticism toward men comes up? Henry finally stops smiling completely. I don't think asking for fairness is being defensive. The room gets quieter. Henry continues calmly, but firmly. I think there's a dangerous habit now where people assume asking for nuance means excusing bad behavior. Those are not the same thing. Strong applause spreads across the audience again. Joy looks frustrated now. But you keep framing men as misunderstood. Henry answers instantly. No, I'm framing human beings as individuals. The audience claps loudly again. Joy exhales and leans back in her chair. You know, you're very good at this. Henry smiles politely again. At conversation? Joy smirks. At surviving television. Big audience laughter. Another host jumps in quickly before Joy can continue. I actually think what's interesting here is the audience reaction. People clearly connect with what he's saying. Joy responds immediately. Because audiences love hearing attractive celebrities tell them everything is complicated. Henry chuckles softly. Everything usually is complicated. Joy looks straight at him again. But sometimes things are simple. Henry nods once. Yes, he says calmly. And sometimes oversimplifying complicated issues creates more division than solutions. The audience erupts again. One audience member loudly yells, Exactly. The crowd claps harder. Joy laughs awkwardly while shaking her head. You've got supporters in here today. Henry glances toward the audience with a smile. Or maybe people are just tired of being forced into extremes. A huge applause breaks out again, even louder than before. The camera cuts briefly toward audience members nodding while clapping. One host fans herself jokingly with her cue cards. This is becoming a town hall meeting. Laughter spreads across the studio. But Joy is still focused. She leans in one more time and says carefully, "All right then. Let me ask the question everyone online is probably asking right now." The audience immediately quiets. Joy looks directly at Henry. "Do you think men have it harder today than women?" The crowd reacts instantly with loud gasps, scattered applause, and nervous laughter as all the hosts turn toward Henry waiting for his answer. The entire table goes silent after the question lands. You can hear scattered reactions from the audience. Some people clapping already, others groaning, a few laughing nervously because even they can tell the conversation just crossed into dangerous territory. The camera cuts briefly toward Henry Cavill, who stays completely still for a moment, looking down at the table before lifting his eyes back toward Joy Behar. One of the co-hosts quietly mutters, "Oh boy." Audience laughter breaks the tension for half a second. Henry finally smiles faintly. That's not a question with a useful answer. The crowd reacts immediately. Joy leans forward. "Why not?" Henry keeps his tone calm. Because turning social issues into a competition between men and women usually makes things worse. Strong applause spreads across the audience. Joy interrupts quickly. "That sounds nice, but people still want an answer." Henry nods. People often want simple answers to complicated realities. Joy points toward him. "You keep saying that whenever you don't want to commit." A louder reaction comes from the crowd this time. Henry stays composed. "No, I say it because I genuinely believe it." Joy shakes her head slightly. "But don't you think avoiding direct answers contributes to the frustration people have with public figures?" Henry takes a breath. "I think pretending there's a single answer would be dishonest." One host quietly says, "Fair." Joy immediately jumps back in. "Okay then, let me narrow it down. Do you believe modern society is harsher toward men emotionally?" Henry pauses again, choosing his words carefully. "I think men and women experience pressure differently." Joy interrupts instantly. "That's another non-answer." Henry smiles politely, but there's visible firmness in his expression now. "No," he says calmly. "It's an answer you don't like." The audience explodes. Several people clap loudly while others audibly react with OHHH. One co-host covers her face laughing. "Okay, now we're officially off script." Even Joy laughs briefly out of surprise before regaining composure. "You see," she says. "There it is. That's the real answer." Henry tilts his head slightly. "I've been giving real answers the entire time." Joy responds immediately. "No, you've been giving safe answers." Henry finally leans forward a little more than before. "And I think there's an important difference between safe and responsible." The audience applauds again. Joy folds her arms. "Responsible to who?" Henry answers without hesitation this time. "To reality." That line gets one of the loudest reactions of the interview so far. The audience erupts into applause while multiple people stand briefly clapping before sitting back down. One host laughs nervously. This audience has chosen sides. Joy smiles tightly. Apparently, Henry notices the tension and tries to soften it slightly. "I don't think anyone here is actually disagreeing on the core issue," he says. "Most people want fairness. Most people want respect. The disagreement usually comes from how conversations are framed." One co-host nods slowly. "That's true. But Joy isn't done." "No," she says firmly. "Because some people hear conversations about fairness for men and immediately think women are losing something." The audience quiets again. Henry responds carefully. "That's exactly the problem." Joy raises an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Henry keeps eye contact with her. "It means empathy shouldn't feel threatening." A loud wave of applause fills the studio. Joy immediately counters. "But historically women had to fight for every bit of empathy they received." Henry nods respectfully. "Absolutely." Joy gestures toward him. "Then why do conversations about men suddenly need protection?" Henry answers calmly again. "I don't think anyone's asking for protection from accountability." Joy cuts in. "But," Henry continues before she can finish, "I think people are asking not to be reduced into stereotypes." The audience claps again. Joy shakes her head. "But women have dealt with stereotypes forever." Henry nods once. "Yes. And that was wrong too." The crowd reacts loudly again. One host jumps in carefully, clearly trying to cool things down. You know what I think is interesting? Neither of you are actually arguing about whether respect matters. You're arguing about perception. Joy immediately says, "No, I'm arguing that privileged men suddenly feel uncomfortable when they're criticized." Henry turns toward her calmly. "And I'm saying criticism becomes unproductive when it stops seeing people as individuals." Applause breaks out again. Joy sighs dramatically while the audience laughs. "You really practiced for this interview." Henry chuckles. "I genuinely didn't." One co-host jokes, "He's either naturally composed or secretly a politician." The audience laughs loudly. Henry grins. "That might be the worst thing anyone said about me today." Even Joy laughs at that one. But after the laughter fades, Joy looks serious again. "You know what bothers me?" she asks. Henry nods politely. "What bothers you?" "I think celebrities sometimes speak in these very polished, neutral ways because they don't want backlash from male fans." A few audience members clap. Joy continues. "And I think that silence allows bad behavior to continue." The room grows quieter. Henry answers more slowly this time. "I understand that concern." Joy watches closely. Henry continues. "But I also think there's danger in assuming every man who asks for balance is secretly defending something terrible." Strong applause rolls through the audience again. Joy immediately asks, "So you think men are misunderstood?" Henry exhales softly before answering. "I think human beings misunderstand each other constantly." The audience reacts with softer applause this time. Joy shakes her head laughing. "You refuse to walk into any trap." Henry smiles slightly. "I just don't think public conversations improve when they become battles people are trying to win." One host points between them. "That is literally what daytime television survives on." Huge audience laughter breaks out. Henry laughs too. "Fair point." Joy smiles briefly again, but then says something sharper. "But here's what I notice. Every time women express frustration publicly, some men immediately say, 'What about men?' The audience gives mixed reactions. Henry nods slowly. "That does happen." Joy looks surprised he agreed so quickly. "But," Henry continues, "I also think some men genuinely feel disconnected and uncertain about their place socially now, and immediately dismissing that feeling probably doesn't help." A loud applause spreads through the crowd again. Joy responds quickly. "Disconnected from what?" "Power." Henry's expression tightens slightly. "No," he says firmly. "Disconnected from identity." The audience quiets immediately. Henry keeps speaking. "I think a lot of young men right now are confused about what they're allowed to be. They hear masculinity criticized constantly online, but nobody clearly explains the difference between healthy masculinity and toxic behavior." The audience applauds loudly. One co-host nods slowly. "That's actually a really important point." Joy crosses her arms. "But women have spent decades being criticized too." Henry answers immediately. "And that criticism was harmful." Joy pauses. Henry continues calmly. "I don't think solving one problem requires creating another one." Huge applause erupts again. The audience energy now clearly shifts heavily toward Henry's side, and even the hosts can feel it. One host jokingly whispers, "Joy, the crowd is turning on you." The audience laughs loudly. Joy laughs too but shakes her head. "I can handle disagreement." Henry immediately responds softly, "Disagreement is healthy." Joy looks toward him carefully. "You really believe that?" Henry nods. "Of course." Joy asks, "Even when someone completely disagrees with you publicly?" Henry smiles faintly. "Especially then." The audience claps warmly. For the first time in several minutes, the tension lowers slightly. Another host tries steering the conversation elsewhere. "Okay, before we accidentally break daytime television forever, can we talk about acting again?" Big laughter fills the studio. Henry laughs harder this time too. "Please." Joy smirks. "No, one more question." The audience instantly reacts again. One host throws her hands in the air dramatically. "Joy." Joy ignores her and looks directly at Henry again. "You've talked a lot about nuance today," she says. "But do you think there are moments where neutrality becomes cowardice?" The audience goes completely silent. Even Henry seems caught off guard by how direct the question is. He pauses for several long seconds before answering carefully. "Yes," he says finally. Joy leans in immediately. "So when does that happen?" Henry folds his hands together calmly. "When people stay silent in situations involving genuine harm." Joy nods quickly. "Okay, but," Henry adds firmly, I also think falsely labeling people or oversimplifying conversations creates different kinds of harm. The audience claps again. Joy responds instantly. But oversimplifying is how television works. Henry smiles faintly. And maybe that's part of the problem. The studio absolutely erupts. Audience members clap loudly, some standing again while others laugh in shock at how direct the answer was. One host literally drops her cue cards onto the table laughing. Oh my God! Joy stares at Henry for a moment before bursting into laughter herself despite the tension. Okay, she says while laughing. That was good. Henry laughs too now, finally relaxing slightly again. The crowd continues cheering for several seconds before calming down. One host wipes tears from laughing. Twitter is going to have a field day with this interview. Joy shakes her head smiling. They already are. Henry jokingly looks toward the camera. My apologies in advance. Huge laughter spreads through the studio again. But even as everyone laughs, you can still feel the tension underneath it all. Because the audience knows something unusual just happened. This no longer feels like a normal celebrity interview. It feels like a real disagreement that neither side fully backed away from. And as the applause slowly dies down, Joy looks back toward Henry one more time and says, "You know what? I still think you avoided giving certain answers today." The audience reacts instantly again. Henry looks at her calmly and replies, "Or maybe I refuse to give dishonest ones." The entire studio explodes. The audience reaction lasts several seconds after Henry Cavill delivers the line. People are clapping loudly, some standing again while others are laughing in complete disbelief at how intense the conversation became. One camera catches audience members looking at each other with expressions that practically say, "Did that really just happen on daytime television?" At the table, even the hosts look stunned for a moment. One co-host leans back in her chair, shaking her head while laughing. Okay, that's going viral in about 5 minutes. The audience laughs and applauds again. Joy Behar exhales dramatically before smiling. You know what? I'll give you credit. You stayed calm the entire time. Henry smiles politely. I'm trying. Joy points at him jokingly. No, you're winning the audience. That's what you're doing. Henry laughs softly. That was never the goal. One host jumps in. Honestly, I think people just like seeing an actual conversation instead of rehearsed celebrity answers. The crowd applauds. Joy nods slowly. That part one agree with. For the first time in the interview, the tension genuinely starts easing instead of temporarily cooling down. Another host asks Henry, "Do interviews ever frustrate you now because every answer becomes dissected online?" Henry immediately nods. Absolutely. The audience quiets again to listen. Henry continues calmly. I think public conversations have changed dramatically. People don't just watch interviews anymore. They clip 10 seconds, attach a headline, and suddenly that becomes your entire opinion forever. Several audience members clap. Joy responds this time with less aggression in her tone. But isn't that partly because celebrities became too media-trained for years? Henry nods slightly. That's fair criticism. The audience reacts with soft surprise at the agreement. Henry continues. But I also think audiences can tell the difference between authenticity and performance. One co-host says, and this definitely stopped feeling performative a long time ago. Huge laughter breaks out again. Joy laughs too. True. Henry smiles. I think we crossed that line around 20 minutes ago. The audience erupts again. One host jokes, some poor producer backstage is sweating right now. More laughter. Joy glances toward the audience. You know what's funny? Half the crowd looks ready to defend him like this is a courtroom. Several audience members cheer loudly. Henry laughs and raises both hands jokingly. Please don't. One audience member yells, You cooked her. The crowd explodes laughing. Joy points toward the audience member dramatically. Security. Even Henry bends forward laughing at that. The atmosphere finally feels lighter again, but the conversation still carries emotional weight underneath the jokes. One host turns serious again. I actually think this interview touched on something bigger, she says. People are exhausted emotionally right now. Everybody feels judged constantly. The audience applauds softly. Henry nods immediately. Exactly. Joy adds. And social media makes people feel like every disagreement is moral warfare. Henry looks toward her with a small, surprised smile. I completely agree with that. The audience reacts warmly at finally hearing agreement between them. Joy shrugs. See, we found common ground. Henry grins. Eventually, one host laughs. only after nearly starting a cultural debate on daytime television. Big laughter spreads again. The conversation slowly transitions into a more reflective tone. Joy looks toward Henry and says, more sincerely now, I'll be honest. I pushed you hard today because these conversations matter. Henry nods respectfully. I know, Joy continues. And I do think celebrities influence culture whether they want to or not. Henry answers calmly. I agree with that too. The audience quiets again. Henry speaks more thoughtfully now. I just think influence comes with responsibility to avoid reducing complicated human issues into slogans people can scream at each other. Strong applause spreads across the room. One co-host says softly, that's probably the most serious this show has gotten in months. Joy laughs. Maybe years. Henry smiles. I apologize to daytime television. The crowd laughs loudly again. But then one host suddenly looks down at her phone and bursts out laughing. Oh no! Everyone turns toward her. Joy asks, what? The host holds up her phone. Social media is already exploding. The audience cheers loudly. She keeps scrolling while laughing. People are literally posting clips from 10 minutes ago already. Joy shakes her head. Of course they are. Another host asks, whose side are they taking? The audience reacts loudly before she even answers. The host laughs harder. Mostly Henry's. The crowd erupts. Joy throws her hands in the air dramatically. Traitors. Even she's laughing now. Henry shakes his head, smiling awkwardly. This is exactly what I was talking about. One host reads from her phone. Listen to this one. Henry Cavill just gave a masterclass in staying calm under pressure. Huge applause breaks out again. Another host reads another post. Here's one. Joy Behar finally met someone she couldn't interrupt. The audience absolutely loses it laughing. Even Joy is laughing hard now despite herself. Okay, that one's funny, she admits. Henry smiles. I feel like I should leave before this gets worse. One co-host says, too late. The internet already adopted you. The audience cheers loudly again. Joy leans toward Henry one final time. You know what I'll say though? Whether people agree with you or not, at least you actually engaged. Henry nods respectfully. That's important. Joy says, most celebrities would have shut down completely. Henry shrugs lightly. I think difficult conversations are healthy if people stay respectful. The audience applauds warmly again. One host says quietly, that's probably the key point. For a moment, the entire table becomes noticeably calmer than at any other point in the interview. Then Joy smirks one last time. But I still think you dodged a few questions. The audience instantly bursts out laughing again. Henry laughs too before answering. And I still think some questions deserved more complicated answers. Huge applause fills the studio one final time. The closing music starts playing softly underneath the conversation. One host smiles toward the camera. Well, this definitely turned into something more intense than we expected today. Another host laughs. People at home are screaming at their TVs right now. Joy points toward the camera dramatically. And probably yelling at me specifically. Audience laughter erupts again. Henry smiles warmly now, the tension finally fully gone. Before the segment ends, Joy looks at him sincerely and says, you handled yourself well. Henry nods respectfully. Thank you. So did you. The audience gives one final round of applause as the cameras slowly pull back from the table. But the story doesn't end there. Within minutes of the interview ending, clips flood social media. Short edits of Henry saying, nuance disappears, begin trending immediately. Another viral clip shows him saying, empathy shouldn't feel threatening, with millions of views pouring in within hours. Comment sections explode with debate. Some viewers praise Henry for staying calm and measured under pressure. Others defend Joy for asking difficult questions that many interviewers avoid completely. Online discussions break out everywhere. People argue over masculinity, modern culture, celebrity responsibility, and whether public conversations have become too hostile. Several major entertainment pages repost clips from the interview before the afternoon even ends. One viral post reads, Henry Cavill just turned a daytime talk show into a philosophy debate. Another says, this is the first celebrity interview in years that felt genuinely real. Even other celebrities quietly react online. Some praise Henry's composure. Others praise Joy for refusing to back down. By evening, the interview is everywhere. Reaction channels analyze every moment. Body language experts start posting breakdowns. Headlines begin appearing across entertainment sites discussing the tense exchange. Backstage reports later claim producers were shocked by how intense the conversation became live on air, especially because the original interview was supposed to focus mostly on movies and upcoming projects. According to audience members, the energy inside the studio felt even more intense than what viewers saw at home. One attendee later posts online, "You could literally feel the room split during parts of that conversation." Another writes, "Honestly, it stopped feeling like TV and started feeling real." And strangely enough, that authenticity becomes the reason the interview spreads so quickly. Because for once, it didn't feel scripted. It felt messy, emotional, uncomfortable, honest, tense, funny, frustrating, and human all at the same time. Exactly the kind of live television moment audiences rarely get anymore. And as clips continue spreading across the internet late into the night, one final question keeps appearing everywhere online. Was Henry Cavill genuinely shutting down Joy Behar? Or was this simply two people refusing to back away from a difficult conversation? Make sure to share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.